The distress beacon had been looping for 11 days when the meridian finally matched orbit with Station Aura. Rin Nakamura pressed her face against the porthole glass the way she always did on approach, the way her mother had laughed at every time they flew somewhere together, back when flying somewhere was still a thing people did in atmosphere. Old habit. She'd stopped being embarrassed by it somewhere around her 15th deep space posting. The station hung against the dark like a paper lantern, pale, faintly lit from within, and absolutely, completely still. "Docking rings powered," said Vaskov from the pilot's seat. His voice was the same tone he used for everything, which Rin had decided was either extreme professionalism or a symptom of something she didn't want to diagnose. "Life support nominal, gravity plating at 62%. "That's why they want us in boots," said Yemi. "That's why they want us in boots," Vaskov agreed. Station Aura had housed 43 Keth researchers for the past 6 years. The Keth were the closest thing humanity had found to a mirror species, bipedal, tool-using, curious, with a social structure organized around music and mathematical proof in equal measure. The xenobiology community called them the most significant discovery in the post-contact era. The tabloids called them the ones that liked jazz. Rin called them remarkable because they were. The beacon had started 11 days ago. No voice message, no text packet, just the tone, a pure Keth alarm frequency, 342 Hz repeating. The four of them crossed the docking umbilical in single file, Rin, Vaskov, Yemi, and D, with their boots clacking softly on the corrugated floor. The inner airlock cycled open and the smell hit her first. Not bad exactly. Something organic and sweet like overripe fruit, with an undertone she couldn't name. She'd smelled something similar once in a greenhouse where the fumigation system had failed, and the mold had been quietly eating the walls for 3 weeks before anyone noticed. She didn't say anything about the smell. The main corridor was dim. Emergency lighting only, amber strips at ankle height, turning everything into a noir film shot at the wrong angle. Equipment was stacked along the walls in neat piles, which was strange because Keth research stations were notoriously disorganized. They worked in productive chaos, instruments everywhere, half-finished experiments left out like half-read books. This looked like someone had cleaned up, carefully, obsessively. Yemi touched one of the stacked crates. "Sealed," she said, "all of them." "Like they were packing to leave," Dee said. "Or packing something in," Rin said. They found the first Keth in the communal area, a long room that served as both cafeteria and meeting hall. He was sitting at a low table in the Keth resting posture, 4 limbs folded inward, crest lowered, and he looked up when they entered with an expression Rin had learned to read as calm over years of study. Almost serene. He had a ceramic bowl in front of him filled with some pale liquid, steam rising in the low gravity in long, lazy spirals. He made the gesture for greeting, then he made the gesture for welcome, then he turned and made the gesture for please sit. "He's offering us tea," Yemi said. "I can see that," Rin said. Vaskov had his hand near his sidearm in a way that was technically professional and practically terrifying. "Where are the others?" The Keth, his name, according to his station identification badge, was Othsevra, a senior acoustics researcher, made no response to the question. He simply gestured again at the space around the table. His crest pulsed once, a soft bioluminescent blue, which meant contentment or satisfaction or we are exactly where we should be, depending on dialect. He wasn't alarmed. That was the thing that turned Rin's stomach. He was not alarmed in the slightest. They'd been briefed that the station had gone silent. They'd been briefed on the possibility of a containment failure, a pathogen, a psychological event. They had not been briefed on what to do when you arrived and found someone quietly making tea and acting like nothing in the universe was wrong. Dee crouched down to Othsevra's eye level. "Can you understand me?" he said, using the standard Keth acoustic phrasing, rough accented but comprehensible. "Where are the others? What happened here?" Othsevra blinked. His inner eyelid slid sideways, which Rin had always found unsettling in a way she couldn't articulate, and he tilted his head approximately 40 degrees. Then he looked past D, toward the far wall. There was a panel there, half hidden behind a storage rack someone had pushed aside. It was covered in small amulet discs, Keth resonance markers, the kind used in acoustic research to dampen standing waves. They were arranged in an overlapping pattern, layered 3 or 4 deep, pressed flat against the wall with a kind of desperate insistence. Someone had used adhesive, physical fasteners, and in 2 places what looked like melted resin to hold them in place. Rin walked toward it. "Rin," Vaskov said, "I'm just looking." The amulets were warm under her fingers, vibrating at a frequency too low to hear but not too low to feel, a buzzing in the bones of her hand. They were resonating together, all of them, a choir of tiny dampeners singing something into silence. Behind them, in the wall itself, she could see a faint discoloration, a greenish-black stain spreading from a single point, like a bruise under skin. She found the topmost amulet. It was slightly proud of the others, slightly loose. She touched it. "Don't," said Othsevra. It was the first word he'd spoken. Perfect human standard English, which the senior researchers all had. She looked at him. He had risen from the table, crest fully extended, chromatophores cycling rapidly through colors she didn't have names for. "Don't," he said again, and there was something in his voice that she hadn't heard in 6 years of Keth study, something that sounded like fear wearing a mask of calm. "We found a way to hold it. The markers hold it. If you move the markers." Yemi moved the marker. She'd been coming up behind Rin to look at the wall, and she'd put her hand out for balance, and her fingers caught the topmost disc and pulled it 2 centimeters off the surface, which was enough. The sound was the first thing, a frequency that went straight through the ear and into the chest cavity, a pressure wave that felt like a fist around the heart. Every amulet on the wall lit simultaneously, blazing white, then went dark. The greenish-black stain spread visibly, fast, branching through the wall panels like ink dropped in water. And then the smell hit, thick and sweet and wrong, so much stronger than before, filling the room in seconds. Yemi said "oh" in a very small voice. Then she made a sound that wasn't a word. It started in her sinuses. Rin watched, frozen, as something moved under the skin of Yemi's face, something that was reorganizing things methodically, with no particular hurry. Yemi's jaw unhinged slightly, not broken, redesigned, and a string of greenish fluid ran from her lower lip. Her eyes went to a flat, matte black. Her head rotated 40 degrees past the normal range of human motion and stopped there, looking at the ceiling with an expression that wasn't quite any expression Rin had ever seen on a person. Then it looked down at Rin, the head at that terrible angle, and smiled. Rin ran. She ran the way she'd run in exactly one prior crisis situation, which was a containment breach on a research vessel when she was 26 that had ended fine but had given her a recurring dream. She ran badly, with too much upper body motion and her breath already ragged, and she ran directly into D in the doorway because he'd heard the sound and turned back, and they went down together in a tangle of limbs and equipment bags. She heard Vaskov behind her. She heard something that was no longer Yemi behind him. "Get up," Vaskov said, and she got up. Othsevra was standing in the middle of the room looking at Yemi that wasn't, with the expression of a man watching whether he's predicted and taken no pleasure in being right about. "The others," he said, apparently to no one. "They are all like this now. I held the markers. I am the only one who held the markers. I don't know how much longer I can." Yemi's arm hit him at approximately 3 times the speed a human arm could move, and he sat down very hard. Rin grabbed his arm. She grabbed D with her other hand. She ran. There are certain things the human body can do under sufficient duress that it cannot do under normal conditions. Rin was aware of this intellectually. She had not previously been aware of how it would feel, which was something like being filled with a very cold white light and moved by it, all rational thought pushed into a back room and the door locked. She ran through the corridor with people who were no longer her friends moving in the rooms on either side. She could hear them, hear the wet sounds and the chattering noise they made, somewhere between laughter and a signal tone, and she ran and she thought nothing. She thought nothing until she hit the acoustics lab and stopped because there was nowhere left to run. The lab was where she'd expected it to be from the station schematics. It was also where she hadn't expected to find Dee already thinking, because Dee was a pilot and pilots thought in systems and redundancies, not in xenobiology. But here he was pulling up the sound board while she was still catching her breath against the wall. Music, Dee said. The Keth use music for what? For everything: communication, medicine, ritual. And research, Rin said. Acoustic research. The amulets were resonance markers, they used them too. She stopped. Her brain, slowly returning from the back room, was assembling something. They used them to dampen standing waves, interference patterns. The parasite, whatever it is, it came in on a frequency. Othsev held it back with counter-frequencies. So we need to find what frequency it's running at and invert it. We need to flood the station with the countertone. She was at the console now, pulling up the resonance data, the months of Keth acoustic research, all of it sitting in the buffer, patient, waiting. Except I have never done this before and I have no idea if it'll work, and the math is going to take time we probably don't have. Vaskov had barricaded the door. He looked at her over his shoulder. Estimate. 20 minutes, maybe 15 if I don't make any mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. I know. Then 25. I know. From somewhere down the corridor, something made the chattering sound. Something answered it from a different direction. They were communicating, she realized. Whatever they were now, they were still communicating, still organized, still. In some sense, she didn't have a word for still there, looking out at the world and figuring out what it was and what it wanted from them. She thought about Yemi. She thought about Yemi the way you let yourself think about a thing for exactly 1 second so you can box it up and put it away. And then she looked at the console and started working. The math was not as bad as she'd feared. That was the thing about the Keth. Their research was meticulous, organized, cross-referenced. Everything you needed was where it should be. She found the parasite's base signature in the contamination records Othsev had apparently been keeping up until approximately 9 days ago, when his own notes became fragmentary and strange. She found the theoretical counterfrequency in the standing wave equations the team had been developing for an entirely different project. She found the station-wide speaker array in the maintenance schematic and patched into it with her access codes, and then sat back and looked at what she'd built. That's it, Dee said. That might be it. What does might mean? It means I'm a xenobiologist who just did acoustic physics for 22 minutes while something was trying to get through the door, she said. It means I checked my work twice, and I'm going to have to decide if twice is enough. The door bent inward, not broken, bent. Something on the other side pressing slowly and steadily, patient in the way that things without rational minds are sometimes patient, in the way water is patient with stone. Vaskov stepped back from it. Rin looked at the console. She looked at the door. She thought about Yemi properly this time, not the 1-second box but all of it, the full weight of it, and then she pressed play. The sound came from everywhere at once. It wasn't loud. That was the thing she hadn't expected. She'd imagined something massive, a wall of noise, but the counter-frequency was subtle. A presence, not a force. A particular harmonic that found the spaces between other sounds and filled them, the way water finds the spaces between stones, and in the filling changed everything about the shape of things. She felt it in her teeth. She felt it in her chest the way she'd felt the initial wave, but opposite, not a fist but an opening, a held breath released. From the corridor, something screamed. Not Yemi's voice. Not any voice she recognized. It was the parasite's voice, she realized, distinct from the host for the first and last time, and it was. She'd expected rage or pain, but it sounded like confusion. Pure, absolute confusion. The thing had been running on a specific frequency for what might have been thousands of years, and something had introduced a variable it had no framework for, and it simply didn't know what to do with that. Humans were good at that, introducing variables, breaking frameworks. Being the one thing in the room that refuses to behave the way the model says it should. The door stopped bending. 3 minutes later, 3 very long minutes during which no one spoke, the chattering sound faded, then stopped, then faded from another part of the station, then stopped there too. In the relative silence, Rin became aware that she was sitting on the floor. She didn't remember sitting down. She became aware that HFY was in the room. She didn't remember him arriving. He was holding his resonance markers in both hands, all of them, which meant he'd collected them from the wall before running, which was either forward planning or profound habit, and he was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You knew what it was," she said. He lowered his crest slightly. "We encountered something similar on our homeworld. 14 centuries ago, approximately. We learned to contain it. The markers were supposed to hold. Someone moved one." "Someone always moves one," he said, and there was something in it that sounded like the oldest kind of tiredness. "That is the nature of visitors. They find what you have sealed and they unseal it, not out of malice, out of curiosity," Rin said. "Yes." She thought about that. She thought about every sealed thing she'd ever opened, every amulet she'd ever disturbed, every system she'd poked at because she needed to know what was inside, and she thought about how you couldn't really train that out of a person. You could warn them. They would still, eventually, look. "Is it gone?" Dee asked. "The parasite, is it actually gone?" Othsev turned to Rin with a look that she recognized from faculty meetings and academic conferences, the look of a scientist asking another scientist to weigh in, peer to peer. "You built the counterharmonic," he said. "What is your assessment?" Rin thought about the math. She thought about the fact that she had checked her work twice. She thought about Yemi, who was somewhere in this station and possibly still breathing, and about how she really needed that to be true. "It should be suppressed," she said. "Not destroyed. The lattice will still be there. We'll need to work out a permanent counterfrequency emitter, and we'll need to study exactly what we're dealing with." She paused. "Which I would very much like to do, if that's all right." Othsev was quiet for a moment. Then he made the gesture she'd been waiting for without knowing she was waiting for it, the one that meant something between "let's begin" and "you are welcome here and I believe we are going to understand this together." She stood up. She was shaking in a way she'd been managing not to notice. She thought she'd probably be shaking for a while. "First things first," Vaskov said. He had holstered his sidearm. He looked, for the first time Rin could recall, slightly less than perfectly composed. "Is there actually tea?" Othsevra looked at the bowl on the distant table, still steaming, improbably intact through all of it. He made the gesture for yes. They walked out of the acoustics lab into the amberlit corridor, stepping around things she didn't look at, toward the communal area and whatever came next. Rin's hands were still shaking. Her brain was already moving on to the problem, pulling up the data, sketching out the parameters of a study that no one had ever conducted, because no one had ever survived being this close to the thing to know what questions to ask. She was alive, and it was an extraordinary amount of data, and the tea was still warm. That seemed like enough to start with.